Paul Hendricks sat in the cramped office of the U.S. Army Intelligence Facility in Guam, staring at the decoded Japanese diplomatic cable that had arrived 3 hours ago. The fluorescent light above him flickered, casting shadows across the document that might contain the key to ending the war without dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. His hands trembled slightly as he read the message for the 7th time. The cable, intercepted from Japanese Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo to Ambassador Naotake Sato in Moscow, contained what appeared to be a genuine peace feeler. The Japanese government was seeking Soviet mediation to end the war, with terms that suggested a willingness to surrender under certain conditions. The emperor's position would need to be preserved, but beyond that, the language was remarkably flexible. 3 days. That's how long Hendricks had known about the Manhattan Project's first operational bomb being loaded onto the Enola Gay. 3 days until a city of 350,000 people would be vaporized in an instant. And now, this cable sat on his desk, unreported to anyone above him in the chain of command. The problem wasn't the intelligence itself. The problem was Captain Raymond Kellerman, his immediate superior, who had seen the initial translation and immediately classified it as low-priority diplomatic chatter. Kellerman had been clear. "We're not in the business of playing diplomat, Hendricks. We intercept, we decode, we report what Washington wants to hear. And right now, Washington wants confirmation that the Japs are fanatical to the last man, not peace overtures." Hendricks had served in military intelligence for 3 years, working his way up from a junior crypt analyst to his current position as a senior intelligence officer. He had always followed orders, always trusted the chain of command. His father had been a career army man, and Hendricks had absorbed the military ethos from childhood: duty, honor, obedience. But this was different. The cable suggested that Japan's leadership understood their position was hopeless. The firebombings of Tokyo had killed over 100,000 civilians in a single night. The naval blockade had strangled their supply lines. The Soviet Union was about to enter the war against them. The military situation was catastrophic, and some within the Japanese government knew it. Yet here sat Hendricks, holding information that could potentially be escalated, that could reach the president, that could change everything, and his orders were to file it away and forget about it. He thought about the men he'd served with in the Pacific. Good men who had died on beaches with names that Americans back home couldn't pronounce. He thought about his brother, killed at Guadalcanal, his body never recovered. The Japanese had earned what was coming to them, hadn't they? This was total war. This was justice. But 350,000 people, not soldiers, people. The office was nearly empty at 2300 hours. Most of the night, Shift was in the signals room, processing routine intercepts. Hendricks could hear the distant clatter of teletype machines, the low hum of voices from down the corridor. He had maybe an hour before anyone would check on him. His hand moved toward the telephone. He could call Colonel Morrison at Pacific Command. Morrison was old-school intelligence, believed information should flow up the chain regardless of political considerations. But Morrison was also Kellerman's friend, had served with him in the Philippines. Would Morrison even take the call seriously? Or would he simply confirm Kellerman's assessment and add a note to Hendricks's file about overstepping his authority? The alternative was more dangerous. Major General Charles Willoughby ran intelligence for General MacArthur. Willoughby was known for his independence, his willingness to challenge consensus when he believed the intelligence warranted it. But going over Kellerman's head directly to Willoughby would be career suicide. Even if Willoughby took him seriously, Hendricks would be marked as insubordinate, unreliable. His military career would be over before his 30th birthday. And what if he was wrong? What if this cable was disinformation, a Japanese attempt to sow confusion in the final days of the war? What if the peace overture was genuine, but came from a faction with no real power, unable to overcome the military hardliners who still controlled Japan's war machine? Hendricks stood and walked to the small window overlooking the airfield. In the darkness, he could see the silhouettes of B-29 bombers being prepared for missions. Each one carried tons of conventional bombs. Each one would kill dozens or hundreds when they reached their targets. The atomic bomb was just an escalation of what was already happening every single night over Japanese cities. Except it wasn't. The atomic bomb was something else entirely. A new kind of weapon, a new kind of war, a line that once crossed could never be uncrossed. He returned to his desk and pulled out a notepad. If he was going to do this, he needed to be strategic. Simply reporting the cable would accomplish nothing if it died at the next level. He needed to create a document that was too important to ignore, too well-reasoned to dismiss as the anxieties of a junior officer. For the next 40 minutes, Hendricks composed an intelligence assessment. He cross-referenced the new cable with previous intercepts, showing a pattern of increasingly desperate Japanese diplomatic efforts. He included analysis of Japan's strategic position, noting the correlation between their deteriorating military situation and the more conciliatory language in recent communications. He built a case that this wasn't isolated diplomatic chatter, but part of a broader pattern, suggesting genuine movement toward surrender. But even as he wrote, doubt gnawed at him. Who was he to make these judgments? He was an intelligence officer, not a strategist, not a diplomat, not someone who understood the full complexity of ending a war that had consumed the world for 6 years. Men far smarter than him, with far more information, had made the decision to use the atomic bomb. President Truman himself had authorized it. Who was Captain Paul Hendricks to second-guess that decision? He thought about Lieutenant Colonel James Forrestal, who had visited their facility 2 months ago. Forrestal had spoken about the projected casualties of invading mainland Japan. Estimates ranged from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million American casualties. The atomic bomb, terrible as it was, might actually save lives in the aggregate. American lives, certainly, but possibly Japanese lives too, if it shocked them into surrender before an invasion became necessary. The assessment sat on his desk, unsigned. Outside, the tropical night was thick with humidity and the smell of aviation fuel. Somewhere in that darkness, the Enola Gay was being prepared for its historic mission. Somewhere in Japan, 350,000 people were going about their lives, unaware that their world was about to end. Hendricks picked up the telephone receiver, then set it down. Picked it up again. His heart hammered against his ribs. A knock on the door made him jump. He quickly turned the assessment face down on his desk. "Working late, Captain?" It was Sergeant Miller, making rounds. "Just finishing up some translations," Hendricks said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "You look like hell, sir. When's the last time you slept?" "I'll sleep when the war's over, Sergeant." Miller laughed. "Won't be long now. Heard some interesting scuttlebutt from the air crews. Big mission coming up. Real big. Rumors, Sergeant. You know better than to trade in rumors." "Yes, sir." "Well, don't work all night. Even intelligence officers need rest." Miller continued his rounds, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Hendricks waited until the footsteps disappeared completely, then pulled the car, assessment back toward him. He read through it one more time, making minor corrections. It was solid work, objective, professional, the kind of analysis that Intelligence Command was supposed to produce. But it was also a death sentence for his career if it went nowhere, and potentially a death sentence for thousands of American soldiers if he was wrong, if his assessment delayed the bomb and forced an invasion instead. The clock on the wall read 01:15, August 3rd, 1945. In approximately 60 hours, if everything went according to plan, the Enola Gay would be over Hiroshima. Hendricks made his decision. He signed the assessment, placed it in an envelope marked Priority, Eyes Only, and addressed it to Major General Willoughby. Then he drafted a cover memo to Captain Kellerman, noting that, per standard protocol for potentially significant intelligence, he was forwarding the assessment to Pacific Command for review. The memo was carefully worded to make it seem like routine procedure rather than insubordination. He walked down the empty corridor to the communications room where the night duty officer was reading a paperback novel. "Need this to go out on the morning courier run to MacArthur's HQ," Hendricks said, handing over the envelope. The duty officer logged it without much interest. "You got it, Captain. Anything urgent?" "Just routine intelligence assessment. Nothing that can't wait for normal channels." The lie came easily, and that bothered Hendricks more than anything else that night. He had always prided himself on his integrity, his adherence to regulations. Now he was lying to a fellow officer, manipulating the system, all because he believed he knew better than his superiors. He returned to his office and sat in the darkness, not turning on the light. The document was gone, out of his hands. In 12 to 16 hours, it would arrive at MacArthur's headquarters. What happened after that was beyond his control. Sleep was impossible. Hendricks spent the rest of the night reviewing other intercepts, trying to distract himself. Around 0500, he finally dozed off in his chair, only to be awakened at 0630 by angry voices in the corridor. Captain Kellerman burst into the office, his face red with fury. "What the hell did you do, Hendricks?" "Sir, I just got a call from Willoughby's office. They want to know why I'm sitting on intelligence about Japanese peace overtures." "Peace overtures? Do you have any idea what you've done?" Hendricks stood at attention. "Sir, I followed standard protocol for potentially significant intelligence. The cable warranted escalation for command-level assessment. I made the assessment, Captain. I determined it was low-priority diplomatic noise. That was the end of it. You don't get to override my decision because you've got cold feet about winning this war." "With respect, sir, the cable correlated with multiple other signals suggesting genuine movement toward—" "I don't care what it correlates with." Kellerman's voice rose. "You went over my head. You undermined the chain of command. You're done, Hendricks. I'm recommending you for immediate reassignment to the most miserable posting I can find." "Yes, sir. Is that all you have to say?" Hendricks met his superior's eyes. "I believe the intelligence warranted escalation, sir. I stand by that assessment." Kellerman stared at him for a long moment. "You self-righteous son of a bitch. You think you're saving lives? You think you're some kind of hero?" He leaned closer. "Let me tell you what you've done. You've confused the chain of command 3 days before the most important mission of this war. You've inserted doubt where there needs to be certainty. Men die when commanders hesitate, Hendricks. Remember that." After Kellerman stormed out, Hendricks sat heavily in his chair. His career was over. That much was clear. But had he accomplished anything? Or had he simply created chaos for no purpose? The next 2 days passed in a haze of anxiety. Hendricks was effectively frozen out of meaningful work, relegated to reviewing routine communications while his colleagues avoided him. The whispers followed him everywhere. He'd cracked under pressure, lost his nerve, tried to stop the war from ending. On August 5th, he was summoned to a meeting with Colonel Morrison. He expected to receive formal notification of his reassignment, possibly with a reprimand in his permanent file. Instead, Morrison was oddly subdued. "Sit down, Captain." Hendricks sat. "Your assessment reached some very high levels very quickly," Morrison said. "I can't tell you what discussions it generated. That's above both our pay grades. What I can tell you is that, as of 0800 this morning, you've been temporarily assigned to a liaison role with Strategic Command." "Sir?" "Don't ask me to explain it because I can't. Someone up the chain decided your analysis warranted keeping you in the loop. You'll be monitoring communications relevant to the bomb mission. Nothing else. And Hendricks," Morrison's voice hardened, "whatever happens tomorrow, whatever you see or hear, you keep your mouth shut. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." The next morning, August 6th, 1945, Hendricks reported to a secure communications facility he'd never accessed before. A handful of senior officers were present, all focused on maintaining communications with the Enola Gay and its escort planes. At 8:15 hours, the radio crackled with a brief transmission. "Bomb away." 17 seconds later, "My God." Then, silence. Hendricks listened as subsequent transmissions described a mushroom cloud rising over Hiroshima, visible for hundreds of miles. The bombardier's voice was shaken, stunned. No one in the communications room spoke. They simply listened as history unfolded through crackling radio signals. Initial estimates suggested complete destruction of the city center. Casualty numbers were impossible to calculate, but certainly in the tens of thousands, possibly more. The mission had been a success by every military metric. Hendricks felt numb. He had tried to stop this, or at least pause it, give diplomacy one more chance. He had failed. 350,000 people had been in Hiroshima when the bomb fell. How many were still alive? But even as the horror of it settled over him, another part of his mind was already analyzing. Would this be enough? Would Japan surrender now? Or would it take a second bomb? Or an invasion anyway? 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. On August the 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender over the radio. The war was over. In the weeks that followed, Hendricks learned fragments of what had happened behind the scenes. His assessment had indeed reached Truman's advisors. There had been discussions, debates. Some had argued for waiting, for giving Japan more time to respond to Soviet entry into the war. Others had argued that the atomic bomb was necessary to shock Japan into surrender and avoid an invasion. In the end, the decision had stood. The bomb had been used, and Japan had surrendered. Hendricks would never know if his assessment had mattered, if it had even been seriously considered or simply filed away as the concerns of one junior officer. He would never know if waiting might have produced a surrender without the atomic bombs, or if delay would have cost even more lives in the long run. What he did know was that 200,000 people had died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Cities had been erased in instants, and he had tried, in his small way, to prevent it, and failed. Years later, after the war, Hendricks would read about the Japanese diplomatic cables that had been intercepted in those final days. Historians would debate whether Japan was truly ready to surrender before the bombs, or if the military hardliners would have fought to the last. The debate would never be settled with certainty. Captain Kellerman's prediction proved accurate. Hendricks' career was effectively over. He was quietly pushed toward the resignation in early 1946. His service record noting excellent technical skills, but difficulty operating within command structure. He returned to civilian life and became a teacher, never speaking publicly about his role in the war. But sometimes, late at night, he would wonder about the choice he'd made. Had he been right to try, or had Kellerman been correct that doubt and hesitation were luxuries that wartime couldn't afford? The question haunted him for the rest of his life. The cable that had started everything, the Japanese peace feeler that had seemed so significant, was eventually declassified decades later. Historians would note it as part of a complex picture of Japanese attempts to end the war while preserving some terms. But whether it represented a genuine opportunity for peace or simply diplomatic desperation from a faction without real power remained contested. Paul Hendricks had made his decision based on incomplete information, limited authority, and an impossible moral calculation. He had tried to insert humanity into a machine designed for destruction. Whether that made him a hero or a fool, he never knew. He only knew that he had tried, and that the cities had burned anyway, and that 200,000 dead would never come back to argue about whether it had been necessary. The atomic age had begun, and it had begun with fire.